The Amazing Digital Circus. It's amazing and it's digital. Inspired by the likes of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, CD-ROM games for kids from the 90s and early 2000s, and even Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, this show might look whimsical and fun, but it's all fun and games until a massive pile of guns appears out of thin air. This show is definitely not for kids, despite its colorful appearance. It is a masterclass in psychological horror. The premise of the show is that 6 humans made their way inside this old computer game and are continuously tortured by Kane, an AI who insists on having fun and creating adventures for them in an effort to win them over. However, as of this last episode, it's becoming increasingly clear there's more to Kane than he lets on. How to escape this purgatory is anyone's guess at this point, and the final 2 episodes will, in theory, answer this question, but who's to say as no theory will probably even come close. As with everything that has cemented its way into the zeitgeist, there is naturally a huge online following with this show. I am also a part of said online following, and that's why I decided to take the knowledge I paid 6 figures for in a fancy piece of paper that says I can do music good and combine it with my latest obsession. My name is Owen Meldon. I'm a composer, educator, multi-instrumentalist, and producer, or in simple English, huge nerd. I'm here to explain how the music specifically works with the visuals and how it all blends together. And the scene that I'll be focusing on is the now iconic acid trip / abstraction sequence, a moment that the internet hasn't stopped talking about. But what's going on beneath all that is really what sells the terror. Also, from this point forward, there will be obvious spoilers, so just an FYI, take this opportunity to go and actually watch the series if you haven't done so, or at least just the 7th episode. How do you score a soul collapsing? The crushing weight of fallout between friends and realizing your coping mechanisms aren't working as well as they used to. What does that even sound like in this colorful purgatory? It's a very specific flavor of anxiety that comes from the show's unique approach to the music, and to get why this scene hits as hard as it does, we have to look at the 2 individuals responsible for it. It's decently rare that you get one individual responsible for directing, writing, and composing, as well as a few minor characters' voices, but this is the role of gooseworx, the creator of the Amazing Digital Circus. She's a composer by trade who, quote, started making music for student films and Spindlehorse before animation took over, with projects like Little Runmo and various one-off videos going viral in the 2010s. gooseworx has a very specific musical identity in that she prioritizes juxtaposition. She explicitly stated that she loves happy music playing to something horrifying, or cute little characters being miserable. She really emphasizes this in Little Runmo, where the soundtrack shifts from upbeat platformer video game music to what sounds like a carnival ride burning in hell. She even put out a few covers of Undertale music, which amped up the already chaotic energy of the Toby Fox originals. As far as inspiration for the Digital Circus goes, the music uses anything from cheapy MIDI instruments to wacky synths most of the time in the circus tent, and then that switches to the more orchestral and realistic sounding sides and moments of drama and tension. gooseworx doesn't do the music fully alone though, which is where Evan comes in, gooseworx's lifelong friend and cousin, which I actually didn't know until making this video. They grew up making games in Game Maker, as well as doing their high school's announcements, specifically the weather segment.
I'm going to stomp on you with my feet of heat.
Evan usually acts as a translator to gooseworx's highly expressive nature, squeezing out the maximum potential. She would give me a rough outline of an original song, and then using my knowledge of composition, I would extrapolate on that and flesh it out. gooseworx is an entirely self-taught musician, whereas Evan is a graduate of the DigiPen Institute of Technology in Redmond, Washington, with a degree in music and sound design. In and of itself, the composers behind the Amazing Digital Circus provide that juxtaposition that its very creator implements time and time again. But why does this work? You get the raw and glitchy insanity out of gooseworx and the emotional spine out of Evan that permeates the entire series. It creates this perfect uncanny valley wrong notes feel more natural than something polished ever could. A sound that is so fundamentally broken and unapologetically so, just like Jax here. But before we get into his trip and the music behind the abstraction sequence in episode 7, we have to define first what abstraction is, what it could be, and what it's not. If you're already well versed with Digital Circus lore, then stop thinking to yourself, oh, and episodes 8 and 9 aren't out yet, so we don't know for sure what causes abstraction or anything. You are right. We don't have the full picture, but for the sake of music theory and analysis, and for the sake of the people that clicked just because they saw cool chord symbols with extensions in the thumbnail, here's a working definition of what we do know to some extent. In the world of the Digital Circus, abstracting is a point of no return, a total loss of self where your avatar turns into a living blob of ferrofluid with neon eyes attached on all sides. At least that's what we see with Kaufmo, who's still very much human, and he was given a clown avatar. He abstracted before the events of the first episode along with Ribbit, a human given a frog avatar. It's also revealed that in episode 7 that Kaufmo, Ribbit, and Jax were all close friends. This is important, so don't forget about these two. In the pilot, we see in Kaufmo's room that there's writing on the walls with exit and a surprisingly detailed drawing of him almost getting eaten by Kane, a pretty clear sign of a mental breakdown. Kaufmo then gets tossed into the cellar, and we know that only Kane can open up the cellar where all of the other abstracted humans lie. So what happens with Jax exactly? Nobody really knows 100% for sure if this is how one abstracts in the Digital Circus, but the glowing eyes as soon as Jax wakes up are a dead ringer for nearly doing so. Jax's experience in this episode, lying on his bed in his room, then touching the hand of Ribbit coming out of the corner, paralleling the creation of Adam, bringing him to this magical fractal world where he's naked for some reason. When I was watching this episode for the first time, I kind of likened the whole experience that Jax goes through to ego death. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it's the disappearance of an individual's sense of self, or the removal of one's perception of oneself as an entity separate from one's social or physical environment. It is the ultimate blue screen of the human psyche, where your physical self simply cannot process the complexity of your soul breaking down. Abstraction is not death. It is surrender. And for Jax, who has always been this high-strung, anxious, hyper-masculine jerk to his acquaintances in the circus, up until this point, this moment was probably the most peaceful he has ever been. He was ready to go. Look at that smile. This lovely little cosmic void of color vomit suggests that abstraction feels like a warm bath in the middle of winter with some spearmint Epsom salts thrown in there for good measure. It's his consciousness deciding, I don't want to feel anything anymore. I just want to be everything. Where does that leave the music? The underscore captures a very specific feeling, dissociation, between daydreamy and uncanny, the latter in much more subtle ways that I'll get into when we cross that bridge. But there it is again. Juxtaposing between these two ideas is what makes this sequence so beautiful to watch and to listen to. To understand how gooseworx and Evan translated these feelings into what you hear in the episode, it's finally time to take a look at the transcription. The whole piece is only about 1 minute 40 seconds long. And there's so much to talk about here in all 100 of these seconds. We gotta start with instrumentation. The one instrument tying everything together is an acoustic guitar, but if I were to show you just the guitar part and then ask you to play it, I think you would have a hard time doing so. Why don't you ever stay tuned? Not only is the guitar part pretty much unplayable on a normal 6-string guitar in standard tuning, there's some instances where the chords would probably turn your poor hand into a pretzel. However, for any overachievers watching this, you could always try to tune your guitar's lowest E string down all the way to C, 2 whole steps down. Alternate tunings with low C are more common than you think. Drop C is common in a lot of metal music, as well as a couple songs by Joni Mitchell, who's famous for tuning her guitars in open tunings. Or, if you really want to get crazy, there are 7 and 8-string guitars with extra lower strings. Charlie Hunter is probably the most well-known player of these extra string guitars. His guitars give him the power to play bass lines in addition to playing all of the normal guitar stuff. It's pretty mind-boggling stuff.
Sounds pretty good.
A 7-string guitar with a low A string would be perfect to play this guitar part since it goes down to a low C. So if anyone's got a spare 7-string nylon acoustic laying around, have at it. But enough about guitars. What else is going on? We have 4 woodwinds: flute, oboe, clarinet, and alto sax. Pretty standard high and mid woodwind setup if you're familiar with the world of concert band, which is where I'm coming from. The alto sax is actually played live by Evan, who's been playing sax since he was in high school, and that goes for the credits theme too. And to round out the instrumentation, there's also some light piano and strings. That's it. And with such a visually impressive scene, the music speaks for itself. We are in good old 3/4 time, but not quite fast enough to feel it in 1. We're at 167 beats per minute. All of the eighth notes are swung for the most part, save for a select few bars of straight eighths in the guitar, but other than that and the intro, the guitar part is very rhythmically consistent. You'll notice that I didn't put a key signature here, and this is because there's a plethora of chords here in this piece with no real tonal center, so any key signature would be arbitrary with this analysis. The guitar shifts between B flat major 9 and E flat major 9 in the first 4 bars, and in measure 6 we have our first sharp 11. This A natural comes from E flat Lydian, which is a commonly used mode by film composers to help brighten up the sonorities. In this case, B flat and E flat are the 2 worlds already established, and this A natural bridges the gap between the two in a really nice way that reflects what's going on visually. We see Jax's head spin around, revealing this infinite void of fractals that he's floating into. Measure 8 has 2 rootless voicings, meaning we have E flat major 9 and E flat 9 with no E flat at all. It's a nice curveball, and a clever one at that, to set up the dominant note in B flat major, F, to lead us into measure 9 where the winds come in and we get to see all of Jax. This is where the guitar starts its main rhythmic idea, which I've dubbed the boo-da-boo-da, for lack of a better term. There's this nice little lilting quality to the boo-da-boo-da that I find parallels the piano rhythms in songs like Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, as well as Skating by Vince Guaraldi. This phrase is where the harmonies really start to get interesting. We go from A minor 9 to a wild D7 flat 9 add 4. Flat 9s in jazz are a common extension for dominance, but when you add the 4, now you're cooking with fire. In this case, the add 4 is a G natural, which resolves to a G flat in the next chord, a C minor 9 flat 5. This chord is the first true spicy chord in the whole piece. It's not often that you find this dissonant of a chord this early on. Then we have this wild chain of events immediately afterward. D minor 7, A flat 7, F9, which makes for an awesome turnaround to lead us back to B flat major 9. Shifting the focus to the winds now, we have the flute and alto sax doubling each other at the octave. What gets even weirder is the inner voices, the oboe and the clarinet. Listening to just the oboe and clarinet on their own is pretty weird as is, but because they're so low in the mix compared to the flute and alto sax, their wrongness is actually baked into the context of the chords and adds to the uncanniness of the trippy experience that Jax is going through. The next phrase is more or less the same thing, this time adding in the piano, a different batch of chords to pivot the tonal center to G major, and the winds get little flourishes in their parts as well, including a pretty neat 4/3 polyrhythm between the flute and the alto sax to add another uncanny element. The following phrase has us now firmly planted in G major and introduces the strings. And at this point, the piano part in particular, starting here, reminds me a lot of Eric Satie's Gymnopedes, which incidentally enough translates to nude dances, coming from the ancient Greek gymnopedia. Is this a massive reach? Maybe, but I can't help but notice this link between the meaning of the word and the sparse writing style of Satie in these three iconic pieces, and the fact that Jax is floating through this void sans his signature overalls. Just feels a little too on the nose to be an accident, but I digress. Measure 33 is the start of the alto sax solo, and there's a lot going on in these 16 bars, both musically and visually. We're at the point in the never-ending fractal void where said fractals actually start changing appearance. They start bearing the heads of ribbit at the end of the phrase. The alto sax is supplementing the barrage of chords as we stay vaguely within a B-flat major context. This chord in measure 38, the B-flat 7, flat 9, add flat 13, is a super poignant choice with what's going on with the sax solo. The B-flat 7, flat 9, add flat 13 is voiced with an F diminished 7 chord with a B-flat in the bass and a G-flat on top, creating a uniquely dissonant chord. The B-flat in B natural is a minor ninth, so is the F and G-flat. Add in the tritone of the A-flat and the D, and you get something made up of two of the most dissonant intervals that resolves oh so nicely to the E-flat major 9 after that. But what about our saxophone? Well, the saxophone starts on an E-flat in that measure with that tender little chord, lands on a B natural in the measure that follows. These two notes that are definitely out of place on the strong beats are what we call appoggiaturas. They naturally add tension at a pivotal point visually, in this case when the fractals start transforming. The sax line doesn't resolve to the B-flat we've been expecting it to until a harmonically ambiguous chord, a B-flat diminished 7. Diminished chords are great because they're made up of minor thirds. Almost as if the minor third is an important interval in the context of this piece. And they can lead to a wide range of tonal centers. And in this case, it sets up an A-flat major 13 chord. Major 13 chords are the quintessential, wow, look at you, you must know a lot about jazz chords. But in this context, the A-flat major 13 bakes in an awesome chromatic flute line between measures 41 and 44. You could think of the F sharps as sharp 11s in this case, but I treated them as appoggiaturas since they resolve up to the G. Some subtle woodwind trills and runs round out this phrase as we see that the ribbit head fractals now have more than just ribbit's head, she's joined by Kaufmo! And the camera then pans to Jax in an extreme close-up in this dazed, oh my god, is this really happening look, leading us to the next 8 bars of nothing but guitar. At this point in the sequence, the giant blobs with Kaufmo and Ribbit's heads now have Jax's own head plastered on them as well. And as soon as he sees this, he closes his eyes, just accepts his fate, and surrenders to the state that he's in. This next phrase features the flute and high strings in unison, the only time that a unison truly happens between instruments. What exactly is going on in this last measure though? With augmented chords, the bottom note is considered the root since augmented triads are stacked up of all major thirds. So in this case, the walking bass line in the guitar from D to E to G sharp, these are technically 2 different chords. That's not the only augmented triad at work here. The chord in measure 65 is a C minor 7, which just so happens to be a major third away from A flat and harmonically spelled as G sharp in this case. Augmented chords are great from a music theory standpoint because, like diminished chords, they're tonally ambiguous and they can act as springboards to new tonal centers. With these two augmented chords over unconventional bass notes, they act as a substitute dominant function, leading to C minor 7. At this point in the piece, Jax is in a state of total bliss and could very well be abstracting in his physical form. We don't know, but from a musical standpoint, this final batch of phrases start to take us places harmonically that we don't necessarily expect, but work anyway for the sake of building tension the deeper Jax goes into this trip. For now, let's take into consideration the ever so important circle of fifths, or fourths, depending on how you look at it. I usually refer to it as the circle of fifths. This will come in handy in the following sections. Measures 65 to 72 hints at a return at the initial tonal center of B flat major. You could think of the C minor 7 as the 2 chord, and the F9 as the 5, and they just never resolve to the 1 chord of B flat major 9 like we expected to. But because there's no real sense of resolution as we bounce back and forth between the 2 chords, that naturally creates tension. In measure 72, the guitar plays F9 over A in order to set up something completely different, G sharp minor 9. I didn't want to write this as A flat minor, so sorry to the 2 A flat minor fans out there. G sharp minor has a doable amount of sharps instead. But we know that G sharp and A flat are the same note and harmonic equivalents, and that G sharp / A flat and C sound a major third apart. Pretty crazy. Starting in measure 77, the winds come in one by one to add this awesome textural element with the trills before making a hard left and putting us in a completely different key immediately afterwards. This is no accident. We're starting with an E minor 9 with a sharp 11, which is already weird as is, but take a look at the circle here. We started on C minor 9, then went to G sharp minor 9, and now we're at E minor 9. Major third, major third. The root notes of each of those phrases outline an augmented triad. And with this level of detail, consciously aware of it or not, that's how you know the rest of what's coming is going to be insane to listen to. The winds emphasize the top notes of the E minor 9 sharp 11 chord, the D, the F sharp, and the A sharp, all major thirds apart. Yet another augmented triad baked into the context of the ending of Jax's journey here. The flute line manages to emphasize all of the very colorful notes. We got the A sharp, which is a tritone away from the root E. Then we have the F sharp, which is the 13th in A13. And in measure 83, the flute's D rubs up against the clarinet's C sharp, which is a minor 9th. And then to top it all off, we have yet another augmented chord, this time an A augmented 9 in the guitar, with an additional major 7th in the melody. For the viewers, at this point, all of these colors and the swelling music is borderline sensory overload. But for Jax, this is pretty close to his swan song of his escapism coping mechanism. Everything stops sounding like music, starts sounding like raw information. And from here on out, we start to amp up the harmonic intensity measure by measure, foregoing the usual 8-bar phrases and just letting everything happen. Jax is so far gone into the trip that the music reflects this perfectly. Bear in mind that we started with an E minor 9 sharp 11. In measure 85, we've moved to G minor add 9 as the strings take the melody. 2 measures later, B flat minor 9. Another 2 measures later, C sharp minor 9. E, G, B flat, C sharp, minor third, minor third, minor third, minor third. The home stretch outlines a diminished 7th chord to drill into your brain that this is where the mounting tension just keeps piling on and on until a hard pivot to, of all things, a G9 sus4 chord, just a half step away from the previous F sharp 9 chord. The music reaches its zenith, and at this point we're all expecting some sort of obvious resolution and a nice clean finish. Only only to be interrupted by Pomni ringing the doorbell, immediately snapping Jax out of his transcendental trip as we see his glowing pink and teal eyes. The music was a tell that he was ridiculously close to abstracting, and had he been in there for just a second or two longer, he would have been gone. The music in this scene is just one part of an episode that made so many people online want to cry, puke, curse out Kane, or break their monitors after the batshit insane ending twist. But this scene is the first course in a masterful gaslight dinner that is The Amazing Digital Circus Episode 7. Typically in horror and or psychological thrillers, the composer uses the score to warn the viewers. Think the Psycho strings, the Halloween piano. Gooseworx and Evan did a full 180 with this and wrote something that you could sleep, chill, rip a bong to. By using this certain instrumentation and the chords that they did, they hacked your brain into putting its guard down so that you could have a grand old time with Jax. You want to stay in this beautiful vast nothingness of fractals and frog and clown heads, and that makes the realization of what's actually happening externally, the death of his conscious mind, hit you like a ton of shrimp bricks. Because you were seduced by it too. I threw a lot of big fancy musical terminology into the analysis, but there is, of course, a deeper narrative reason behind all of it. This whole episode has so many moments with deeper meanings, it doesn't even scratch the surface. The entire piece is just one big ol' spoonful of juxtaposition soup between major thirds and minor thirds, augmented versus diminished chords, consonants versus dissonance. That's what it all essentially boils down to. But aside from the technical terms, in a show called The Amazing Digital Circus, with its early CGI charm and fakey MIDI instruments most of the time, the choice to center this scene around acoustic guitar, piano, strings, and woodwinds feels inherently human. Intimate, almost, with those deliberate inner voice dissonances in the winds, impossible guitar tunings, these thick chords that shouldn't work but yet function narratively. It all feels like a broken memory of something human. It fits perfectly with the concept of abstraction. You aren't just glitching out, you are losing the last bits of your humanity. Jax never said it out loud at this point in the episode, keywords here, but he was ready to stay in the circus forever if it meant being with his friends for all of eternity. The fact that the music never got a clean ending implied that he was willing to be stuck in the circus long before he panicked and pushed the red button revealing Kane's facade. But don't take my word for it anymore. Now that you know what to listen for with this scene, here's the transcription in its entirety.
Way to interrupt my nap.
It is genuinely wild to think that this much weight was poured into this scene. But that's the magic of the Amazing Digital Circus. It treats its absurdity with the seriousness that it deserves. I'm super impatient for these last 2 episodes to drop, and I am both super excited and terrified to see where gooseworx and Evan take us next. If you enjoyed this deep dive and maybe want to validate the 6-figure price tag on my music degree, then please drop a like and subscribe. There's also YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music playlists of all the songs mentioned in this video, plus a few more for further listening if you want to take an even deeper dive. And if gooseworx or Evan somehow managed to watch this video, I am so sorry that I ruined your work with music theory. Please remember to drink water and take your vitamins today. Thanks for watching.
Bubble, give me a drum roll.